Hello and good evening, everyone. It's Jade Simmons here. I am your one and only 2020 independent presidential candidate. Very proud to be running as an independent because I believe that the leadership that we are calling for right now must come to the table with no lopsided agendas. And we must have only one mission, which is to finally and truly serve as many of the American people as possible. That is my mission. You can learn more about it at operationrestoration2020.com. This is the daily debrief. It's where we go into the news that's happening now, but it's most important for you not to just get a rehash of what's going on, but for you to understand my vision and understanding of what's going on and how it would affect how I would lead the country, and most importantly, how I see you as its citizens. I want to talk tonight about the WHO, the World Health Organization. For the last couple of weeks now, I've been threatening to talk about it, but there have been moving developments. It's important to me to try to bring you as much as I know at the height of the intelligence available. So we're doing that tonight. We're going to be talking about who's to blame. We're seeing now a season of finger pointing as we get closer and closer to election season. And as the world begins to get a handle on COVID-19, people are going to have questions, especially the people who suffered the most, who lost the most during COVID-19. So we'll talk about that tonight. I want to give you some insights on how I think we as a nation need to be showing up on the international scene. We'll also talk at the end about the correlation between US, China, and money, your money, in fact. Again, you want to learn more, you're going to visit operationrestoration2020.com. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm. Many of you have been going out of your way to reach out and to let us know that you're really appreciating having a unique voice right now in the race. You're wondering, how do you help? You'll notice we haven't been asking for donations. It's just not the time. There's so much more that we as individuals and individual households, small businesses must be thinking about. And so we're excited to see you helping in the way that you can, which is to help us spread the word. Right now, you can imagine the news cycle is rightfully cluttered with information about COVID-19. Very soon, we will start to see, well, a bit of light in terms of being able to talk about different things. So we're excited to be able to take our message more to the country. In the meantime, thank you so much for sharing what's resonating with you. And don't just share it. Don't just click the share button, but we dare you to let people know what exactly are you hearing that's getting you excited about the idea of what a new normal could look like. What about the leadership that I have been presenting to you is really resonating? Dare to share specifically so people can understand where you're coming from and why we're here. Let's jump in. I always promise to start with good news. I saw somebody on Facebook rightfully complaining, saying we never talk about recovery. She was talking about the media coverage of COVID-19, the good news, the great news, the fantastic news, as devastating as hearing about the deaths are, and as sensational, as headline grabbing as the deaths are. You know, we're over 55,000 people who have died from COVID-19. But the good news that doesn't often get reported is that we have way more recoveries, over 107,000 recoveries to date. People were saying, why doesn't the news cover that more? Well, because the news is the news, right? You want to have more eyes, more ears on every outlet, on every news show, but also because, quite honestly, what people are concerned about is how will this affect them negatively? Nobody's really wondering what's going to happen if I survive COVID. They're wondering what's going to happen if I succumb to it. So that's why you'll see a lot of the coverage pointed that way. But we promise to give you good news. Other good news, you've heard me say that in order to reopen safely, we need to be testing about 500,000 people a day. That's the conservative estimate, not my opinion. It's given to us by our health officials, our health experts, and they even believe that 1 million tests a day is on the low side. About a week or so ago, I was telling you, maybe 2 weeks now, that the US our testing capacity was about 150,000 a day, which is way over many nations. You've heard the president say that, but the truth is, in order to reopen safely, many experts believe we need 500,000. The good news is we are seeing a massive testing buildup. Now you might say, Jade, why would you talk about that? That's saying that maybe the country is headed in the right direction. Maybe that's not good for me. Maybe I should only be telling you the information that makes me look like the savior. Listen, good leadership wants you to know the truth no matter what. And it is great news, no matter who is in charge, that we are seeing a turnaround. So we're seeing a massive testing buildup, which is very exciting. You may have seen the conference over the weekend, press briefing, where you saw so many American companies who were taking part in helping to ramp up testing capabilities. We're seeing companies go in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks to almost doubling their testing capacity. That's good for us because we're going to need about 30,000 new people to really begin to test and trace people once we really fully reopen. So that's good news. All right, speaking of good news, I promised a couple weekends ago that we were going to be running into an era. Matter of fact, it was last Sunday. I talked about running into an era of hard truth, of hidden truths, and new truth. And the next day, we started hearing things we hadn't heard before. Friday, we're bringing you a special edition of the Daily Debrief with one of my health advisors, Dr. Carolyn Richardson. And she'd been saying for weeks now, there was so much we needed to be giving a second look to. So we're going to be talking to her, giving you information you probably don't want to hear about ventilators. You're going to hear some information from me about what I now think about the shutdown and how to reopen. Things have changed. It's important for you to understand that your leaders should be evolving where issues are concerned. At the height of our intelligence, we must shift or pivot to make new discoveries and new modes of operation, to take new directions. We cannot be beholden to our own pride, afraid to say, hey, we only knew this much 3 weeks ago. Here's how my opinion is changing. That's going to be so important. That kind of transparency and ability to let the American public know that things are changing. We're going to talk to you about different things that I believe are being suppressed because it's not good for the people that are suppressing the information. You've heard me say that I want to lead a nation that is the most informed nation, because I believe information is supposed to be power. It's supposed to empower us. So you will always hear me bring you information that I think you need. Let's dive in and talk about the WHO. That's going to be most of the focus tonight. As always, I want to see your questions and I'll try to give you answers in real time as well. If I don't see them in real time, I'll come back and respond to you later tonight and tomorrow. So if you don't know who the World Health Organization is, quick Google search will clear that up. But just so you know, think of them. These are actually their words. They work worldwide to promote health, to keep the world safe, and to serve the vulnerable, especially. They say that their goal is to ensure that 1 billion more people have universal health coverage, to protect 1 billion more people from health emergencies, and provide a further 1 billion people with better health and well-being. They're made up of about 7,000 people from more than 150 countries. You've heard a lot of back and forth now between the president, President Trump, between China and the WHO. We know that the US, at least from our leadership standpoint, not very happy with the World Health Organization, even unhappier with China. And I want to explain some of these things so that you can understand how we need to be looking at these things into the future. We're rightfully consumed right now with our own condition, our own status and situation here in the States, but we have to understand that there are pieces moving right now that will affect the welfare of our nation into the future. Everybody thinks of this as starting in China, but here's something I want you to understand. Taiwan actually claims that they discovered information about COVID-19, told China, and they were dismissed. They weren't taken seriously. Taiwan is not a member of the World Health Organization because of China. China does not allow it. As a result, when Taiwan reached out to the World Health Organization, they also didn't pay much attention. So Taiwan says, hey, we were not taken seriously. And it has been almost a month before the World Health Organization announced COVID as a public health emergency, a month later. So part of the reasons we're upset right now with China is because, or really upset with the WHO, is because they took China's word for everything in the beginning. So a lot of the anger that you'll hear President Trump express is because he feels like China wasn't forthcoming with the WHO, and the WHO just kind of took them at their word. They followed China's line, took them at their word. And one of the things they said very early on is that there was no real chance of a species jump, is what they call it in scientific terms, COVID going from animal to human. I always tell you, I've been following coronavirus when it was still called corona back in December. And I remember when they were saying, don't you worry, this thing is not going to jump. I remember when it was only 6 deaths and went to about 100 in a few days' time. I also remember when they were saying probably would never reach the level of a pandemic. You know, it has to be in over, I think, 23, maybe 27 countries to be considered a pandemic. That's also why it's not the same as the flu. People keep making that comparison. It's a wrong comparison. And I remember when these things were supposedly not possible, was not going to be nearly as bad as SARS, and here we are. So why am I telling you about this? I want us to understand what we're hearing in the media, the information that's being put out and how it's angled, because I believe that the leadership that takes over the White House come November has to be able to come with a clean slate. You have to believe that your leaders are always working for you and that what you hear, you can trust at face value. But I want you to understand some of the things that you're hearing. There's a reason we're suspicious of China. When I say we, I mean the US. There's a long history of suspicion, but there's a reason the rest of the world is also very suspicious of China. One of the reasons is because they have a history of being secretive where numbers are concerned. If you wanted to find out real numbers about the Tiananmen Square incident years and years and years ago, you wouldn't be able to find those because those numbers are literally classified as a national secret. Those are not going to be things that we're going to find out. If you wanted to find out how many people died from the death penalty in China, can't find that out. Those are national secrets. They are not released to the public. Very different than how we do things in the US. So there's a history of secrecy. So of course, people assumed again that China was being secretive. Do I personally believe they were? Yes, I do. As I said, I've been following this virus from the beginning. I remember when one of the leading doctors who's now dead from coronavirus, was one of the first to speak out and say, this is worse than what we're expecting. This is worse than what the media is reporting. It's worse than what the government was saying. When China was reporting around 1,000 deaths, there were people, medical experts, who were saying they believed the true death count was in the tens of thousands, high tens of thousands. This doctor was made to go on state TV and recant everything that he said. This was something he was threatened with, and he had to make this statement. He took his words back, and then later his words were proven wrong. And then, of course, earlier this year, he passed away from coronavirus. Some people don't think that is how he died. So there's always been a shroud of secrecy there. And I've been saying from the very beginning that we have to keep our eyes on China. We have to demand at the end of this a really serious investigation. And we have to look at how we are going to have consequences in the future for this kind of behavior. That's not just bad behavior. This is life-threatening behavior. So many of you saw recently, China came out with new numbers that were double their earlier numbers. And many people are saying, see, we knew they were lying. I want you to understand what's going on there as well. They're having a very similar situation as we are in the States in terms of a tug of war between our political figures and our medical community. Into the future, I want to lead an administration that enables you to put trust in our experts and in our professionals. It is not helpful for you to have to wonder who to listen to. Leading healthcare experts, leading professionals, leading virologists, and have to wonder, do I listen to what they're saying, or do I follow the political figure that I really like, that I want to trust? It's going to be so crucial that Americans understand where they can put their trust. China is dealing with a very similar case here where there's a tug of war, like I said, between their public health officials who put out the new numbers. You went back and found out how they were doing things. They changed diagnosis methods over 7 times. That's a good thing. What that meant is in the beginning, they thought they knew how to diagnose it, changed it 7 times. It evolved, it became better. When they applied those late figures with the earlier cases, the numbers were much larger. So basically the earlier form that they diagnosed ended up with not looking like a lot of people had the virus. When they came up 7 times later with a new version of the diagnosis, they realized we really underdiagnosed who died from COVID. So that's why you saw that big jump in the numbers. You'll probably find out later that the political officials there would have rather those numbers not been exposed. Why am I talking about this tonight? Well, because we hear the president talking a lot right now about being unhappy with the WHO, the World Health Organization, if you're just tuning in, and being very unhappy with China. Here's what you need to understand. The president was actually originally asked if he was worried that China was up to no good, if he was okay with how they were handling it, and he said he really did think they were handling it well. Things have changed. Many of you remember the early ban on travel that the president enforced. It was called a travel ban, and it did not allow certain people in and out of China. US citizens could come back and forth. There was a lot of harsh criticism. People called the president racist for that. I don't actually believe the ban was racist. I do believe that the verbiage that followed after it was. And I think we have to be so careful that we're distinguishing between characterizing and clarifying something in terms of calling it the Chinese virus. That seems like forever ago. I'm glad that that era is over. And you have to understand the difference between clarification and demonization. You'll hear me say over and over and over that as we move forward, new leadership must learn the art of communication at the highest level. We cannot afford demonization. It is costly. It creates stalemates, and it puts us in a bad position into the future. I was saying that about some of the earlier candidates in the presidential election. We demonize big corporations, when we demonize companies, when we demonize the wealthy, it puts us in a very tough position when you need those very same entities and people into the future, like we did right now. We're watching other businesses have to bail out small businesses because the government was unable to do so. So we're going to need leadership now that is not hasty to demonize. If we're truly looking for solutions amongst our own populations and in our relationships around the world, demonization is going to set us back. It's not strategic and it's not shrewd. You know that the president defunded recently the World Health Organization. Here's why I believe that's not a good idea. It's not a move that I would have made personally. It's because many of the poorest developing nations haven't even gotten coronavirus yet. They've not even gotten COVID-19. So what that means is they've either not gotten it or they have it in small form right now, but they have not yet hit their peak. They count on funds from the World Health Organization to finance their fight against this illness. They're not able to fight in the same ways that developing nations are. That developed nations, are. Look at how rough of a fight it's been for the US, for the UK, for Germany. And we are the wealthier, more developed nation. So imagine what this outbreak, how much havoc it's going to wreak. Now, I always say, give you two options. If you can't see things from a humanitarian perspective, that these are all God's people on the face of the earth, and we should do whatever is within our power to help when we can. That yes, we must serve the American people, make sure that our needs are covered. But like we're doing now with ventilators, sending them to different parts of the world, we must be able to aid from a humanitarian standpoint. If you don't buy into that, if that feels like it's too much hard on your sleeve, let's look at it from a shrewd economic standpoint. When you don't help developing nations, it almost always will come back to bite us in the end, especially when an epidemic is concerned. We're so focused on reopening the economy right now. The last thing we want is a resurgence not caused by us on American soil, but once we have traveled back and forth again, if we have not eradicated this illness in other parts of the world, as soon as we fully reopen, we're inviting disaster all over again. Imagine starting back making economic progress. We'll talk about the state of the economy in an upcoming session soon. But imagine we start making this progress back only to have COVID-19 reintroduced into our system. So the WHO, World Health Organization, hit back today, and they said, listen, we let the world know when there were only about 80 cases outside of China. We let them know that this thing was hitting, that it was big. The WHO gave recommendations, prescriptions for how to deal with this, and they said, we can't help it. It's not our fault if people didn't take the measures that we prescribed. Now, that was most likely a dig back at the president, who very recently kept saying that the WHO really dropped the ball on this, especially because they were sort of in bed with China. The president has been really calling out China lately. Here's the problem. I do believe there was secrecy on the part of China. I do believe there was mishandling on the part of the WHO, maybe in terms of just simply being too trustworthy of where the virus was coming from, not doing their own investigation early enough. But here's the catch. Their delinquency still doesn't make up for ours, because the delay between the initial breakout and our breakout was huge. We had a lot of case studies to prepare for. So there, when you talk about investigating, you better believe you're going to watch this start to happen already in Congress. People are going to wonder what happened. And we're looking at politics right now, but you'll hear me talk on Friday about how I feel individual Americans are going to be jumping into a very litigious era. You're going to see a lot of people begin to sue hospitals, cities, states, media outlets because of misinformation. People are going to want someone, some organization to blame for their pain. So information and how we present it is so crucial, not just for public good, but if we're all as organizations trying to cover our bases, our very communication, the way that we talked about this virus, can come back to haunt us. So the president, whoever he or she is responsible for protecting Americans, for working with our allies, in this case, for mitigating the effects of COVID-19. Here's the hard truth, and I'm going to take you to a restorative vision that I have for the nation. The hard truth is that the U.S. overly relies on foreign producers. We rely on Mexico. We had to rely on China to save our people, for all the PPEs we need, for the vital drugs that we needed. It's already been agreed upon that this is a big failing where America is concerned. You'll see policymakers right now in Washington introducing bills to correct this over dependency. It's really a weakness from any way that you look at it. And you'll hear people say, well, we're pulling out of the WHO, or we're withdrawing funding from there, or we came out of the Paris Climate Accords because we want to preserve U.S. sovereignty. We want to maintain our independence. I'm going to talk to you later about what has to come alongside the independence. I believe we saw a dearth of resources around the world during this epidemic. It really, put a glaring light on many of our issues. But I also think the silver lining is this. There is an ongoing industry, a new industry, in what I call ongoing emergency preparation. That could be jump-started right now. This is an industry that not only we could use right now to help ourselves, but to help nations around the world. That's not just coming to you from a humanitarian standpoint. We're talking about jump-starting the economy, and what we need to do is not just open the economy as it was. We're going to need new jobs now, because everyone who's out of work doesn't just get to go back to work, because if they're like my small business, you're still awaiting funding. You may not be able to hire anyone new into the future. So there's this new industry we must look at, ongoing emergency preparation. What we could start by doing is reopening some of our closed factories, employing some of the people most recently laid off during COVID. We could begin the process right now of beginning to restock our own stockpiles. You think that's premature? It's not. Heaven forbid we have a resurgence. What we don't want to do is be in a worse position, more depleted than we were at the beginning of this. Looks like we'll have enough ventilators. It's a whole nother story for Friday, but we don't want to be in the same position all over again. So we have to begin preparation right now. I call it perennial preparation. Always be preparing. So with that new industry, you could jumpstart with new jobs, new hires right away. We could begin the process of restocking our own stockpiles, but get this, we could also begin to profit from helping other nations restock their own inventory. No one's thinking that far ahead right now because we're so consumed, rightfully so, by just getting out of this mess. We're going to need innovation now in leadership that doesn't wait until the crisis is over to begin recovery. Not just recovery in terms of saying we're open, but we're going to need new measures so that we can get out ahead of the next emergency. I believe we benefit from new jobs that we'd create. We benefit from that demand. And there's another industry we could benefit from. If you look at the change in the landscape, even where environmentalism is concerned, you've got places like Italy, serious pollution, serious air pollution. Just like Italy, China as well saw incredible drops in their carbon emissions during COVID because there weren't planes, there weren't cars on the road. Italy is saying, look, we could have never gotten our people to make this adjustment in good times, but because we've made it, we've sort of gotten used to it. So they're looking to lock in now these environmental benefits that have come from being on shutdown. They're looking to lock that in, and they're going to need now new ways to preserve those environmental gains. The US must be in on this. We should be leading the charge in alternative energy production and not putting all of our eggs in oil and gas, because now we could benefit. Not just, if you can't get behind green energy for the sake of the environment, if you don't really buy into the fact that we should be good stewards of the earth that we have been given, then go again from the economic standpoint. We need more jobs. We need to jumpstart the economy. What if we hadn't been dragging our feet where clean energy was concerned? A friend of mine will say, Jade, we're never going to go to clean energy because it's not profitable. Everything's about oil. Look at right now. We want to make sure that we're first in line to benefit from changes made around the world. Here's my restorative stance that I'll end with. This is the way that I believe we must be leading moving forward. The current president, and you may agree or disagree with the different agreements that he's pulled out of, but there are roughly 11 or 12, depending on if you count them as being fully pulled out of the agreement or thinking about pulling out of an agreement. And many of them I actually do think really should be looked at. They have merit in them. But here's the question. When we pull out of those organizations, the argument is because we want to make sure that we really maintain our own sovereignty. But here's the thing. America must make sure they have a seat at the most important tables. Someone said to me recently that if you don't have a seat at the table, you'll find out you're on the menu. And I'd heard that one before, but then someone else said, you're not going to invite me late to the party and then give me a fixed menu. That's what we have to make sure we're not risking. I'm not as worried about eroding American sovereignty as I am about eroding American influence. We must be primary influencers. America's the only country right now on earth outside of the Paris Climate Accords. That's a discussion for another day. But when the world starts setting their own regulations for how they're going to operate in the world, we don't get to not be affected by that. We can opt out of an agreement and still be affected. As president, I want to ensure that we are at all the right tables, heck, that we're building some of these tables, that we need to be setting the tables, leading these discussions. I believe we have to be present in order to have influence, and we have to be present in order to have leverage. There's a lot of negotiating that's going to have to go on after this. I'll end by telling you about one of the big negotiations, and we need to have leverage. When we withdraw, we think sometimes that we're crippling the other organizations or crippling those nations, but often it's our very absence that's creating a void. And that void allows other parties to galvanize on other sides, and that galvanization could do us harm in the end. We don't want to be out of the loop. So I'm looking to take a long-term view that takes these things into calculation and consideration. We don't want to just stick it to a nation or stick it to an organization in the short term. That can't be prioritized over holding the best hand in the long term, or being in the best position, or being able to make the most powerful corrections down the road. There should be an investigation, I definitely believe, into how China handled COVID-19. There should be consequences when nations are found to have operated without integrity, especially when so many lives are at risk. I want you to think, this is a sidebar that's coming to me right now, and I hope I say this correctly. I know there's still a lot of debate over whether or not, 55,000 people is really a lot. I know that a lot of epidemiologists who work with numbers and statisticians will tell you, look, it is awful that we've lost even one person, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big number compared to the population. I understand the numbers, I understand the math, but I only see in terms of human life and human purpose. So when I see a life snuffed out prematurely, I think of a purpose snuffed out prematurely. I think of a realm of impact that is also suddenly missing from the earth. So I take those numbers very seriously. I don't just hear 55,000. I think about all the impact each of those lives could have made, no matter how old the people might have been who died. I think about how much more life they had to live and what they had to give in that lifetime. But I'm saying that because if you're having trouble feeling the magnitude of that number, I want you to imagine, what if we had proof that this was done to us on purpose? What if this was a a weapon of warfare. The same way we suffered through 9/11, we knew that that was brought on us. It was an attack. What if something like that happened to us and it took out 55,000 people? I'm not saying that that's the case with COVID-19, but I want you to imagine for a minute if what happened to us was as if what happened to us during 9/11. We would be stark raving mad. Stark raving mad if 55,000 lives were lost like that. I tend to think of this the same way. I understand in terms of overreaction and not wanting to create panic or sensationalism that it's not the same, but I tend to internalize it in that way. I believe we must have leadership now that prioritizes people every time. It's a false equivalence or a false question to make us ask, do we want to save people or do we want to save the economy? People are the economy. If you do not save the people, you will not have the economy to reopen in the first place. We'll talk about more of that on Friday. I say that now because I believe that moving forward, we're going to need leadership that I would like to offer that now understands the importance of timing. We do need to investigate China. We do need answers. When's the time to make certain comments? When's the time to let certain signals loose? We have to have leadership now that knows the art of not just deal making, but the art of communicating at the highest level. These are delicate matters that need to be dealt with nuance, and they can't afford to be dealt with people who are at risk of allowing either emotion to come into play or to allow these things to play out on television in order to appease a base. We have to be done with politics moving into this new era. This must be a period where we prioritize people over politics and especially over partisanship. I'm going to end now with something for you to chew on. Those of you who like to crunch the numbers, whenever the government wants to spend money, I'm ending now talking about the correlation between the US, China, and our money, debt, because you'll understand now how important it is how leaders talk. Because we have to always think not just in the short term, but what the effect on our language will be into the future. One of my financial advisors was telling me this today. She was saying, Jade, when the government wants to spend money that it doesn't have, it must borrow. That's why we've been talking about, the stimulus feels like relief, but I do believe it's going to come back to bite us. Tax season is here. I think we'll see it in taxes, if not this year, then next year. So when our government borrows, again, that's money they don't have. So when they borrow, and you need to know who we've been borrowing from. We're borrowing from individual investors. We are getting money from US banks. We're getting money from the Japanese government. We're also getting a lot of money from the Chinese government and the Federal Reserve. That equals almost $23 trillion in IOUs, right? So we don't have money to pay. We just take another IOU. We borrow more money. Why am I talking about that? Well, you want to think of it this way. The US doesn't have a savings account, right? So whenever we're coming up with this kind of magical invisible money, it's coming from somewhere. They're not just cutting checks out of some magical surplus. I want you to understand that, because every time we are looking to be paid by the government, my fear and my concern and my knowledge tells me that the people who need that help the most will be the ones who suffer the most from it in the long run. Here's what you need to understand now as you watch and listen to more in depth when the president talks about China. China owns a huge portion of our national debt. So President Trump will have to be very careful about how he speaks moving forward, because there needs to be a deal being made as well. So these are delicate times. No one's going to admit it right now, but we're in a precarious situation where our economy is concerned. I have a future debrief coming with you talking about our debt and what many believe is a recession ahead, no matter how soon we reopen. But we have to now think beyond the now, and we have to think into the future where our actions and the words of not just ourselves, but our leadership is concerned. How our leadership speaks in public, how they operate behind closed doors, how their character is on display. All of this is going to matter more than ever before. Our leaders will need to not be so easy to get ruffled. They can't be so easy to read. And there's a level now of self-control, wisdom, shrewdness that's going to be called on for the next mission. I do call it a mission. I've said to you before, I do not come to this with an agenda. Someone said, well, that doesn't sound like much of a platform if you don't have an agenda. It's because we have long now associated every politician with having an agenda. I don't like that word because it usually only serves a portion of the people. So when I say to you, I come to you with no agenda, it's not because I don't have plans. We have so many of them, very big ones, big vision. But what we come to the table with is a mission. I'm on a mission, and that's going to be the recovery of the United States, the recovery of all of the people. We don't want to just give lip service right now to minorities who are suffering more. That's what the stats are saying, are suffering differently. Everybody now is getting a talking point. When we come out of this, the tendency will be to forget those same communities that are suddenly being highlighted in the news right now. And what you'll do is you'll check the proof, you'll check the track record. If the administration, this one or another one that might take office, if they don't have a history of service to these communities, if they're only showing up in these communities come election season, say that one more time, if they're only showing up in these communities come election season, then you should not expect anything differently if one of those parties take office. We're going to have to now demand something completely new. And that mission that your next leader will have to be on has to be about recovering the people, recovering the economy, but also recovering the power and the status of the United States. We've been damaged by this in terms of reputation. I don't believe it's a done deal. I don't believe we're down for the count, but I think we're going to need now, I know, we're going to have to move into a new era, full-fledged new era. I'm looking now at some of the questions here. Gail says, do you think we should be opening businesses so soon or should we wait? Gail, here's the thing. Doesn't matter anymore. If you tuned in a couple of weeks ago, and I stand by this, you'll hear me talk about where my stance has changed on Friday. I do believe we have reopened too soon, not in terms of timing, but in terms of preparation. What I said a few weeks ago was that we needed to have at least 500,000 tests ready to be able to test that many people a day. We needed to directly fund our state and local public health organizations. They were already underfunded before COVID-19. We actually laid off people who work for public health. Hey, those are the people who already have the training to do the testing and the tracing that we're talking about. So right away now, if we're serious about reopening as a nation, we need to hire about 30,000 new people just to test and to trace people with the virus. I do believe you need to know who's sick and who's well, who looks good but is carrying the virus. We need to know those things. So when I say we should wait, you should move as fast as you are prepared to do so. I think, and I saw this happening now, I think this is the UK's mentality, but what they're doing is you're not making the next move into the next phase until the phase ahead of that has already been prepared for. And I said here earlier that if we have 4 phases, you don't move into phase 1 until you've started preparing for phase 3. So that's how I believe on that. Gail, now that we're moving, my concern now is to make sure that we don't get lax on testing. I would like us to see a system in place for our restaurants, our gyms, so that we as individuals know when we come back that they are following established guidelines. The same way you go to a restaurant and you want to see that certificate saying that they've been inspected, I think we should have a system like that as well for our restaurants. If not, here's my concern, Gail. Forget the humanitarian standpoint for a minute. Economically, legally speaking, what I believe you'll have, you have those people who are always looking for a lawsuit. I think you'll have people who will go into restaurants intentionally, high-end restaurants, and they will look to sue. They'll come down with COVID and they'll look to sue. They may even know they already have it, and they'll come. And I hate to say that, but you have people who will do those things. And can you prevent against that all the way around? No. But you can do a lot better job of it if we are able as businesses to prove that we're ready for the masses again. So now that we're moving, I think the aim has to be on taking the necessary provisions moving forward where testing is concerned. And I think we have to do our due diligence now of creating new jobs. We're telling people they can go back to work, but do those jobs even exist? Loretta says, Florida's governor has commanded the coroner to stop posting its coronavirus data. I'm curious about that because if a citizen wanted to know, I'm pretty sure they could still use the Freedom of Information Act to find out that information. Listen, I'm a motivational speaker, an inspirational speaker by trade. My job is to come in and make you feel really good about yourself and your possibilities and your future. As President of the United States, it is not my job to just be your cheerleader or to hide hard information. Now, where Florida's governor may be coming from, Loretta, is the fact that there is discrepancy in how these deaths are being reported. You see a lot of comorbidity with these deaths. And so sometimes doctors are saying they really died from the diabetes and not the COVID. It's hard to tell. So he may be concerned about inflation of those numbers, but I still believe you need to put the information out and let us hash it out after the fact at this point. It must be information released at the height of intelligence. You can't just shut it down though. All right, ask the families who lost a loved one how they feel about that statement. You're talking about what I said earlier about how people feel like the numbers are small. I get into this debate almost on a daily basis, and I say the same question. It doesn't seem like a big deal until it happens to someone close to you. But I think what we're seeing is an overall desensitization to humanity, to humans' feelings. We are definitely erring on the side of personal liberty, which I think is important. I believe in the power of the Constitution, but I do not think that someone's personal freedom to do what they want trumps my freedom to be healthy or to stay alive, right? So I think there must always be balance. We don't want to restrict American people from being able to move as they want, but I feel like as a leader, we sometimes have to tell you the hard things and ask hard sacrifices of you so that we are not sacrificing you. And we won't downplay as well the economic issues here. I understand as a small business owner with employees to take care of, that this is a big deal. I have friends whose businesses have been around for decades who may be closing their doors. But I do think what will be worse is to give them a false start, to have them get their businesses started back and then have a resurgence that we could have prevented. That to me will be worse. That'll be dealing with this twice. I know the president firmly believes that a resurgence won't be nearly as bad as this, but it's not what the health experts say. They say if we do have a resurgence, it would be possibly worse than what we have, especially because of the correlation with flu season. I, as a believer, as a woman of faith, am definitely praying that that's not the case. But I also believe that when we say God has not given us a spirit of fear, we have to finish that scripture. It says that he's given us a spirit of power, of love, and of a sound mind. Power to means that we have the ability to behave powerfully towards the people we love. We have the power to sacrifice where we need to in order to keep others safe. Love means that I'm going to operate in a way that shows that I care about others, people other than myself. And a sound mind means that I can move with precaution. I can move with wisdom and prudence and guidance and make powerful decisions using the sound mind that I've been given. I don't have to operate in fear, but simply deciding to do things in caution, to be prudent, as the Word of God often tells us to do, also means to operate from a place of faith. All right, I think I will end there for the night. That's all the questions. Let me scroll back to be sure. Okay, let's see. Is there another one coming? One more before I go. Chisholm asks, with all the conspiracy theories surrounding coronavirus, how does the public discern what is real and what should be considered fake news? Here's how I always tell people to listen. And this is even when people ask me as a minister, you know, how do you tell personal stories about yourself without telling too much information? How do you share the faith without offending people? Listen, I believe we have to be focused on the parts of the information that we need in the now. Conspiracy theories, if they're true or not, right now have no bearing on your individual health. If this was a virus that was thrust upon us, it does not change the status of how the virus is behaving right now. That is news that you compartmentalize and you say, when we get out of this, we need to figure out where this came from. I'm releasing a plan soon called the Daniel Plan, Chisholm, to pandemic-proof the nation. And it talks very openly about the fact that we are facing an era where we will see viruses that are completely accidental, that were unintentional, meaning accidentally spread, and that will be intentionally spread. If I were one of our enemies, wouldn't be me as a leader because I would never do this to another nation, but I definitely believe that there are nations that consider themselves our enemies who are watching us very closely. And if they were giving us a grade on how we responded, either as a government or as a people, remember how slow we were to respond to the information, whether or not it was real or fakeism. When they saw that, I bet they were taking notes. And so the next leader now is going to have to lead understanding this is now a possible recurrence in our future. How do we perennially prepare? So you discern looking for the three things. What do I need to know right now to stay alive and to stay safe? What do I need to know right now to keep my loved ones safe and to be able to move in freedom and without fear? And then thirdly, what do I need to turn off in order to preserve my peace? Right? So if none of the information is going to help you in the now, live a better life right now, and also be able to prepare for tomorrow without fear, then turn that information off. Conspiracy theories are not going anywhere. And as you do, if those of you who are really into kind of looking at that information, never take it from one source. Do your own research. Look at all the evidence from all of the sides, especially the sides you normally don't agree with or don't tend to go to for news, because that will give you a more well-rounded picture of how things really are being presented. Okay, thank you so much for listening in. This went a little bit long, but I thought it was necessary to really give some illumination about this topic, because your next leader will need to look at how they deal with international organizations, how we represent ourselves, because your leader really represents the profile of the nation that they lead. So if you have whatever characteristics your leadership exudes is how the world judges that nation as a whole, for better and for worse. Okay, have a good night tonight, and join us especially on Friday for a special edition of the Daily Debrief, where we'll talk about all the things no one's talking about and some don't want you to know where COVID-19 is concerned. Okay, have a good evening.